They told us the remnant states had no fleet left. I believed them because I had no reason not to. I was a field medic, 3rd tier, attached to the administrative garrison aboard the occupied hull Verath-Secundus, which had been the remnant states' flagship before the Rethkai Dominion took it as a trophy of the settlement. We had redecorated the bridge. We had repainted the corridors in the Dominion's gray-green. We had removed the crew plaques and replaced them with our own designations. The hull still smelled of the humans who had built it. Metal, chemical sealant, something faintly warm that I could never identify. But we had been told that would fade in time. It did not fade, but that is not what I am here to record. My name is Seveuth. I served 11 years in field medicine for the Rethkai Occupation Authority, 6 of them aboard captured human vessels reassigned to administrative duty. I am making this record because no one else from the Verath-Secundus garrison survived to make it, and because what happened in the 41 minutes between the hour of the ultimatum and the hour of the silence deserves to be told by someone who was there, who watched it from the medical deck and understood, at the end, exactly what had been done to us and why. The Rethkai Dominion issued its ultimatum to the remnant states on the 43rd day of the occupation's 12th year. I heard it read aloud over the garrison-wide address system while I was cataloging wound dressings in the medical bay. It was phrased, as all Rethkai ultimatums are phrased, in the calm administrative language of a bureaucracy that has never lost. Tier 3 Subordinate Collective Designation, Remnant States of the Human Accord. You are notified that your grace period status has been reviewed and found insufficient. The Dominion requires formal NEAL acknowledgement within 1 standard rotation. Non-compliance will result in the reassignment of your territorial designations and the reclassification of all registered population units as resource tier. Thank you for your continued cooperation. I remember thinking, they will comply. They always comply. The remnant states had been Tier 3 subordinate for 12 years. They had no ships that the Dominion census recorded. They had agricultural stations, 3 orbital platforms used for cargo transfer, and a population of perhaps 11 million spread across 4 colony systems. They had given up their warships as part of the settlement. The Dominion had taken 7 of their largest hulls and then, in an unusual gesture of administrative grace that our officers cited frequently as evidence of Rethkai magnanimity, had returned those 7 hulls 40 years later as decommissioned hulks, stripped of weapons, stripped of drive cores, given back as a symbol. The gesture had been widely praised internally. It showed that the Dominion could afford mercy. I finished cataloging the wound dressings and went to eat. The alert came 8 hours after the ultimatum, while most of the garrison was in the rest period. I was awake because I always slept poorly aboard the Verath-Secundus. The human smell kept me alert in a way I could not explain, and my own physicians had been unable to treat. I was sitting in the medical bay reading an administrative handbook when the scanner station, 2 decks above me, registered the contact. I know the timeline precisely because everything that followed was recorded, and I have reviewed the recordings many times. At 0312 station time, the long-range array detected 7 vessels on an approach vector from the direction of the remnant state's outermost colony system. The duty scanner was a young officer named Keth Varan, not the same Keth Varan as in other garrison records. It is a common surname in our culture, and he flagged the contacts immediately. 7 contacts, moving at a velocity that his instruments initially rejected as a sensor error. He ran the diagnostic, confirmed the instruments were functioning correctly, and filed the correction. The 7 contacts were moving at the velocity the instruments said they were moving at. He did not understand what that meant. He logged it as anomalous and contacted the senior officer on duty, a commander named Preth Sol. Preth Sol came to the scanner station in 4 minutes. I know this because the corridor cameras show him walking briskly, not running, because Rethkai commanders do not run. He reviewed the readings. He asked Keth Varan to run the identification sweep. The identification sweep takes 11 seconds for a standard vessel. For these 7 contacts, it took 11 seconds and returned nothing. Absolutely nothing. No designation, no hull class, no registry, no origin system, no construction date, no drive signature on record. The sweep searched every archive we had, the Dominion's complete registry of all known vessels, which extends to 430,000 entries, and returned nothing for any of the 7. Preth Sol stared at the result for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "Run it again." Kethvaran ran it again. The sweep took 11 seconds and returned nothing. Preth-Sol stood very still. The 7 contacts were by that point 11 hours out at their recorded velocity. He queried their velocity again, as if the number might have changed. It had not changed. At that speed, 11 hours was generous. More like 9, accounting for the approach vector's geometry. He sent a message to the Dominion's regional fleet station, requesting identification assistance and possible escort. The regional fleet station had a standard response time of 2 hours for non-emergency queries. He had filed it as non-emergency, because at that point, he did not know what he was looking at. He knew what the archive said about the remnant states, no ships. He knew what the 7 contacts were not, anything in the archive. He could not yet put those 2 things together into their correct shape. I learned all of this afterward. At the time, I was still in the medical bay, reading my handbook, unaware that anything had changed. The garrison-wide alert came at 0341, General Readiness. All personnel to stations. I put down my handbook and went to the nearest display panel, which showed me the scanner output. 7 contacts. Approach vector. Confirmed. Velocity. The number was there on the display and I looked at it, and for a moment, I too thought it must be a sensor error, because no vessel the Verath-Secundus had ever encountered moved at that speed without showing a drive signature that the archive could classify. I pulled up the identification sweep result on the panel, the blank result. No designation, no hull class, no entry. I stood there for a moment, and then I thought about the 7 hulls the Dominion had returned to the remnant states 40 years ago. I thought about the word decommissioned. I thought about the word stripped. I did not say anything to anyone. I did not know enough to say anything. I was a field medic reading a scanner panel, but I remember the cold that moved through me in that moment. At 0357, Preth-Sol received a response from the regional fleet station. It was not the response he had requested. The regional fleet station had detected the 7 contacts on their own arrays and was querying us for identification. They had already filed their own archive sweep and received the same blank result. They were requesting clarification on what vessels these were, and whether they were authorized to be in this corridor. The Verath-Secundus Dominion maintains complete records of every vessel authorized to operate in every corridor of its territory. If a vessel is not in the archive, it is not authorized. If it is not authorized, it does not, by Verath-Secundus doctrine, exist. The doctrine was developed over thousands of years of orderly administration and had served us extremely well. It had never encountered a situation in which a vessel that did not exist was nonetheless approaching at speed. At 0403, the 7 contacts resolved on the medium-range array sufficiently to establish hull geometry. The imagery was not yet clear enough for fine detail, but it was clear enough for shape. 7 hulls, large, very large. I saw the image on my display panel, and I recognized the general silhouette, because I had been living aboard one for 6 years. They were human-built. The spacing of the hull sections, the particular way the engine mountings sat relative to the command structure, the ventral profile, all of it was the architecture of human construction. These were not alien vessels of unknown origin. These were human hulls. I want to explain something about the way the Verath-Secundus Dominion thinks about human-built vessels, because it is relevant to everything that followed. We have encountered many civilizations in 10,000 years of administration. Some of them built ships that were impressive by the measures their civilizations understood. Some of them resisted the Dominion with what resources they had. None of them, in 10,000 years, had managed to construct something that our archive could not classify. The archive was the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had processed 430,000 registered vessel designs across hundreds of subjugated peoples, and it had never encountered a blank result on a hull geometry sweep. Never, in 10,000 years, once. So when the blank result came back, Preth-Sol did not immediately understand what he was looking at, because his entire administrative tradition had no framework for it. The archive did not return blanks. The archive returned answers. If the answer was not in the archive, the vessel did not exist. And if a vessel did not exist, the reading was a sensor error. That was not arrogance. That was 10,000 years of evidence. The archive had always been right. The archive had been right about every civilization the Dominion had ever processed. It had been right about the remnant states. Or it had seemed to be. At 0403 and 30 seconds, Kethvaran said, very quietly, to Preth-Sol, "Commander, they look like the hulls we gave back." Preth-Sol did not respond immediately. I can see, in the recording, the moment he processes this. The moment the two things come together in their correct shape. The Dominion had taken 7 hulls. The Dominion had stripped them. The Dominion had given them back as a gesture of mercy. The Dominion had documented their decommissioning and entered that documentation into the archive. The archive said, 7 human warship hulls, decommissioned, unarmed, returned to remnant states as humanitarian gesture, year 40 of the occupation. The archive was certain of this, as it was certain of all things. The 7 contacts on the display were not in the archive. Therefore, by doctrine, they did not exist. But they were there. At 0412, the regional fleet station dispatched a response element. 14 warships from the nearest patrol sector, an hour and 15 minutes away at combat speed. This was considered an adequate response for an unclassified contact situation. 14 vessels against 7 unclassified contacts, with no confirmed weapons capability on the contact side, was more than sufficient by Rethkai doctrine. The doctrine was specific. A ratio of 2 to 1 was recommended for unclassified contacts. 14 against 7 was exactly 2 to 1. It was orderly. It was correct. I did not know about the response element. I was in the medical bay, preparing trauma kits, because when the garrison-wide alert comes on, that is what a field medic does. I laid out my instruments in order of likely use. I checked the plasma supply. I verified the surgical lights. I did these things with the trained calm of someone who has done them many times and expects, in most cases, not to need them. I had prepared trauma kits on the Verath-Secundus twice before in 6 years. Once when a pressure seal failure injured 3 personnel in the lower cargo bay, and once when a junior officer had an accident in the maintenance corridor during a routine drill. Neither situation had required more than basic wound care. I was a garrison medic, not a combat medic. The distinction had always seemed meaningful. I thought about that distinction while I prepared the kits. I arranged the instruments the way I always arranged them. Cutting tools on the left, wound closure materials in the center, chemical agents on the right. My hands knew the sequence without my thinking about it. My mind was entirely elsewhere. My mind was on the display panel across the bay, where the 7 contacts continued their approach, unchanged, undeviated, at a velocity that the Dominion's archive had no category for. At 0421, the 7 contacts crossed the threshold of the high-resolution array, and for the first time we could see them clearly. The first clear image came through on every display panel in the garrison simultaneously, because Preth-Sol had ordered the feed broadcast ship-wide. I stopped what I was doing. The 7 hulls were not decommissioned. I want to be precise about what I saw, because imprecision serves no one, and the dead deserve accuracy. The 7 hulls were not stripped. The 7 hulls were not the hollow, weaponless gestures of a Dominion acting from magnanimity. They had been given back, yes. They had been given back with everything removed that could be seen from the outside. The external weapon housings, the visible drive extensions, the antenna clusters. They had been given back looking exactly like decommissioned hulks, weathered and gray and dead. I can only imagine, now, what the remnant states did in the 40 years they had them. What they installed inside the hulls where the Rethkai archive had already recorded. Nothing. What they built in the spaces the Dominion had documented as empty. What they tested, carefully, in the dark of their outermost colony system, far from any Rethkai scanner station. What they learned to do with a ship that the archive believed was dead. Each hull was approximately 1.4 kilometers in length. The weapons now visible on their flanks, visible because they had cleared the outer hull panels and were running open, were not in any Rethkai archive because they had never been scanned before. They had been built in secret in the cavity of ships the Dominion had already classified as harmless. The drive signature we had not been able to classify was not in the archive, because the drive configuration had been built from components the Dominion's census had recorded as agricultural equipment and cargo handling systems. Agricultural equipment. Cargo handling systems. The census entries were there in the archive, purchases filed, reviewed, and approved across 2 decades of ordinary remnant states commercial activity. Drive components disguised as fertilizer processors, weapon system housings recorded as grain storage units, targeting arrays listed as atmospheric monitoring equipment, It was all there, in retrospect, for anyone who knew to look. No one had known to look. The archive said the remnant states had no ships, and so no one had examined their agricultural import manifests for what might be inside them. The Rethkai Dominion had given the remnant states back 7 hulls and 40 years. The remnant states had used both. Dottimer. Brethsol contacted the Dominion's regional fleet station at 0424 and transmitted the high-resolution imagery. He said, in the recording, his voice entirely level, "We require immediate classification of the 7 approaching contacts. They appear to be armed. They appear to be the hulls returned under the Humanitarian Gesture Protocol, Year 40. They appear to have been modified." The fleet station received the transmission and did not respond for 4 minutes, which is an unusual delay for the Rethkai communications apparatus. At 0428, the response came. The fleet station commander's voice was not level. "We are accelerating the response element. We are also filing an urgent query to Dominion Central regarding the status of the 7 returned hulls. Please maintain position and do not provoke." Do not provoke. The 7 hulls were now 43 minutes out. They had not deviated from their approach vector. They had not slowed. They had not sent any communication to us. No ultimatum. No demand. No warning. They were simply coming, at the speed they were coming at, in the direction they were coming in, and the archive that the Rethkai Dominion had maintained for 10,000 years, he had nothing to say about them. I remember sitting down on the edge of a supply crate in the medical bay at some point during this. I do not remember deciding to sit. I was looking at the display panel and the image of the 7 hulls, and I was thinking about the word kneel. They had been told to kneel. The 11 million people in the remnant states, the agricultural workers on 4 colony systems, the cargo handlers on 3 orbital platforms, they had been sent an administrative document informing them that non-compliance would result in reclassification as resource tier. It was the language the Dominion uses for populations that have ceased to be worth managing as people. It is the language of a bureaucracy that has administered subjugated peoples for 10,000 years and has never needed to fear the reply. At 0431, one of the 7 hulls broadcast a transmission on the standard Rethkai administrative frequency. It was in Rethkai. The grammar was correct. The formal register was precisely right. The same register the Dominion's ultimatum had used. Tier 1 Administrative Entity Designation, Rethkai Dominion. You are notified that your ultimatum has been received and reviewed. The remnant states of the human accord acknowledge your requirement for formal kneel acknowledgement. We transmit our acknowledgement herewith. Please find attached a copy of your own ultimatum, annotated. That was all. No threats, no demands, no declaration of war, just the Dominion's own ultimatum, returned, annotated with what was coming. We received the annotated copy. It was our ultimatum, word for word, with each phrase of Rethkai administrative language replaced by a technical specification, where the ultimatum said, "Non-compliance will result in the reassignment of your territorial designations." The annotation said, 7 hulls, designation, Hollow Covenant, class unknown, approach velocity confirmed, arrival in 31 minutes. Where the ultimatum said reclassification of all registered population units as resource tier, the annotation said, weapon systems online. Where the ultimatum said, thank you for your continued cooperation, the annotation said, this transmission constitutes the entirety of our reply. Brethsol read it on the bridge. I read it on my display panel in the medical bay. I imagine every member of the garrison read it wherever they were. The Hollow Covenant. That was what they had named themselves. 7 hulls that the Dominion's archive had classified as dead, built into something the archive had no word for, and given a name that answered the Dominion's mercy with the only currency mercy deserves when it is used as a weapon. At 0433, Brethsol ordered the garrison to abandon ship. He filed the order through the correct administrative channels, and he did it calmly and correctly, and I will say, for the record, that he did it 11 minutes earlier than doctrine required, and that those 11 minutes were the difference between the people who made it to the escape pods and the people who did not. I was in the medical bay. The escape pod cluster closest to the medical bay was access point 7, which I had walked past 600 times in 6 years. I knew exactly where it was. I did not go there immediately. I do not know why. I have thought about it since, and I cannot locate a single rational reason for what I did next. I stood in the medical bay, and I looked at my display panel, and I watched the 7 hulls of the Hollow Covenant come in. What I saw was this. They did not spread into an engagement formation. They did not separate to cover different vectors. They did not do anything that the Verath-Secundus doctrine of naval engagement would recognize as a battle approach. They came in together, 7 hulls in a tight formation that had no precedent in our archive, and they were quiet. That was the word that kept returning to me as I watched. Quiet. The weapons were visible and online, and they were making no sound that our sensors could classify, and they were simply coming, the way the tide comes, the way something that has been patient for 40 years comes when its patience has finally been spent. At 0441, the Regional Fleet Station's 14-vessel response element arrived at the outer edge of engagement range. I want to be precise about what happened next, as I was precise about everything else. The 14 vessels were Verath-Secundus warships of the Standard Patrol class. They were the vessels that maintained order in this sector. They were the vessels that had, over the 12 years of the occupation, enforced every administrative decision, resupplied every garrison, and ensured that the remnant states understood the shape of their situation. They were not the Dominion's most powerful vessels, but they were more than adequate for 14 against 7. The doctrine was clear on this. The Hollow Covenant engaged them at 0:40:41 and 22 seconds. I will not attempt to describe what I saw in technical terms because I am a field medic, and I did not understand what I was seeing in technical terms. What I can describe is what was visible on the display panel, because I watched it, because I still could not make myself walk away. The 14 Verath-Secundus vessels opened standard engagement protocol. They spread into the doctrine-specified formation for an approach intercept against 7 unknowns. They charged their weapons. They broadcast the standard challenge on all frequencies. The challenge was, unidentified vessels, you are operating in Verath-Secundus administrative space without authorization. Halt, transmit registry, and submit to inspection. Non-compliance will be considered hostile action. The Hollow Covenant did not halt. The Hollow Covenant did not transmit registry. The Hollow Covenant did not respond to the challenge at all. It continued on its approach vector at its approach velocity, and then the engagement began, and I understood then why the drive signature had not been classifiable. The Hollow Covenant did not move the way our archive said ships should move. It moved the way something moves when it has been built by people who spent 40 years thinking about nothing else, who had access to a Verath-Secundus-built hull, which meant they had access to Verath-Secundus engineering principles, and had spent 4 decades learning those principles from the inside and then doing something with them that the Verath-Secundus engineers who built the hull had never conceived. What I understood was this. The 14 Verath-Secundus patrol vessels had weapons and defenses and training and doctrine, and the Hollow Covenant had 40 years, and 40 years was more than enough. At 04:43 and 17 seconds, 1 minute and 55 seconds after the engagement began, there were no Verath-Secundus patrol vessels at the outer edge of engagement range. 14 vessels, 0 survivors. The Hollow Covenant continued on its approach vector. It had not stopped, it had not slowed, it had not deviated. The engagement with 14 Verath-Secundus warships had occupied 1 minute and 55 seconds of its transit time, and then the transit had simply continued, as if the 14 vessels had been an administrative detail to be processed and set aside. I watched this on my display panel. I was still in the medical bay. I am making this record now, in the 8 minutes I have before the Hollow Covenant reaches the Verath-Secundus, because 8 minutes is enough time, and because someone should say what I am about to say. The Verath-Secundus Dominion has administered subjugated peoples for 10,000 years. We know how to read a population. We know the difference between compliance and defeat. We know when a civilization has given up and when it has merely gone quiet. We have very good instruments for this, and very long memories, and a very complete archive. We recorded the remnant states' surrender. We recorded their fleet. We recorded the 7 hulls we took and stripped and returned. We recorded their population figures, their agricultural output, their 3 cargo platforms, their cooperative attitude in the 12 years since. We recorded all of it. What we did not record, because we did not think to look for it, was the 40 years. Not the years themselves. We counted those. We knew it had been 40 years since we gave back the hulls. What we did not record was what 40 years feels like to 11 million people who have been told, clearly and in administrative language, that they are Tier 3 subordinate, and that non-compliance will result in their reclassification as resource tier. What it feels like to be given back the bodies of your ships as a gesture of mercy by the entity that took them, to sign the receipt, to say thank you, and then to take those bodies somewhere quiet and spend 40 years filling them with everything you know how to build and everything you have learned about patience. We should have looked for that. We should have known that mercy, when it is administered from total power, is not received as mercy. It is received as the most precise possible measurement of your captor's contempt. It is received as information. They believe you are finished. They believe you are resource tier already, in all but name. They believe you have no answer. When you receive that information, you have a choice. You can decide they are correct, or you can spend 40 years proving they are wrong. The Hollow Covenant chose. I do not know how many people aboard the Verath-Secundus will survive. When I left the medical bay, 4 minutes ago, I passed access point 7 and I made a decision. The escape pods at access point 7 were already full and launching. There were personnel in the corridor who had not made it to any pod. I went back to the medical bay, because I am a field medic, and I began doing what field medics do, which is attend to the people in front of me, with whatever time remains. The display panel is still on. The Hollow Covenant is close enough now that the image no longer fits on the screen. 7 hulls that the archive classified as dead, and they are not dead. They were never dead. They were waiting in the only place that a civilization with no other options can wait, inside the shells of the ships that were taken from them, in the dark, over 40 years, building the only reply they were going to get. I do not think the Rethkai Dominion will make this mistake again. I do not think the lesson will be lost. We will study what the remnant states built in those hulls. We will pull apart whatever wreckage the Hollow Covenant leaves of this garrison, and we will reconstruct every modification and every hidden component and every decision the remnant states made in 40 years of quiet work. And we will write it all into the archive, and the archive will be better for it. We will revise the protocols for returned vessels. We will mandate surveillance of every import manifest filed by every Tier 3 subordinate collective, and we will redefine what decommissioned means in practical terms rather than documentary ones. We will do all of this thoroughly and correctly, because we are the Rethkai Dominion, and thoroughness is what we are. But I think, too, that what happened here is not only a matter of protocols. I think the Dominion has believed for 10,000 years, that subjugated peoples, once properly processed, are finished. I think we believed this so completely that we did not understand we were wrong until the proof arrived at attack speed. The remnant states were not finished. They were patient. I am out of time now. The Verath-Secundus, this hull, which still smells of the humans who built it, which I never could stop smelling despite 6 years, and everything we repainted, is about to find out what the Hollow Covenant was built to do. I am filing this record to the administrative relay at 0449. It is my full account. I have tried to be accurate. A field medic's job is to make things clear, even when the situation is not one she can fix. The Hollow Covenant answered in full. They should have ordered anyone else to kneel.